All right, hello everybody.
Kind of weird.
Welcome back. This is sort of part two of what you just witnessed. I think we could all use a little bit of inspiration. And we just got a big dose of inspiration from Chef Jose and from Jen. Please, let's give them another round of applause. They were amazing. You know, part of what they were discussing, we want to take further right now. You know, Jen is a filmmaker, Chef Jose as a leader of World Central Kitchen. They have really elevated everyday heroes into the idea of disaster response and resilience. And that's not something that we've always thought of when we think of the way that we respond to an emergency. And we're now in a time when there are more emergencies. They're happening in more places. They're lasting longer. It's kind of the new normal. I was with a business leader from Nigeria who is the sort of person you will find in the hallways here at Milken. And he told me a story about his own life and family experience during COVID. He said, look, I always had the means in my family. If somebody got sick, we got on a plane and we flew to London. And then COVID hit. And suddenly we had to worry about what was the hospital down the road like, because that's where we would have to go, because they shut down the airspace. He couldn't travel. And I think for many of us, it's easy to think about the infrastructure as somebody else's problem, you know? And then you see what happened here in Los Angeles with wildfires, right? It doesn't discriminate. It hits everybody. And this is the new world that we're in. In fact, I'm just curious, looking at the folks who are with us in the room, how many of you have your own disaster preparedness plan, like for your family, for you personally? A few? What about for your business or your organization? Who has one? Okay, more of you. What about your community? I'm curious, like, do you know in a crisis what your community's plan would be? Your neighborhood, your broader community, a few of you too. Because I think that's the era we're entering into, and that's what we want to get into, is how do we draw a bigger circle around disaster response and resilience that includes everybody, that includes our not-for-profit partners, our local communities, that includes our business community, because the challenges are now so big, there is no one hotline you're going to call that's going to solve them all. And to be honest, at the moment, they're even getting harder. I mean, in our world at Devex, covering the dramatic cuts to global health, to foreign assistance, to humanitarian aid, this is a moment when there's a lot that looks bleak, and we need to rethink it. So we've got an incredible panel to have this conversation with and to get into these topics. And I want to start with you, Lou, if I can, because Lou Gritzo had a fantastic job. And you got a fantastic job now, Chief Science Officer at FM Global, but part of your role had been running this insurance company. It's the world's largest, I think, commercial property insurer, running this campus, this center that you have, 1,600 acres, where you would see what happens in a disaster, set a building on fire, see what an earthquake might do. What did you learn from that all of us who are thinking about our own families or our own businesses or organizations can take away?
Yeah, just in short, the majority of that damage is preventable if you think about it ahead of time, if you're prepared. So FM is a mutually owned commercial industrial property insurance company. We're a specialty company, that's all we do. But most importantly, we are an engineering and research-based site-specific underwriter. So we have no actuaries. We have about 1,800 engineers. About 2/3 of those are working with our clients on a location-by-location basis to take the research that we do, the standards that we develop from that research, and implement it to reduce their risk. And so what we discover in the laboratory is many times there are cost-effective ways to reduce the risk. There are always ways to reduce it. The challenge for business is making them cost-effective. And so by taking those ways of reducing risk and implementing them in businesses' construction, their operation, how they do things, their people's attitudes towards what they do at work and what they do at home, there's a lot of that risk that can be reduced. I'll give you a very good example. We had a client in Naples, Florida, been right in hurricane zone, Hurricane Central, worked with us for a few years, hardened their facility against wind and water. So storm surge, rain. They're a maker of orthopedic products, a company called Arthrex. They were hit by the 5th strongest hurricane on record to hit the United States, Hurricane Ian, in 2022. They never missed an order. They served as a place for their employees to come as their employees recovered. They were a place for the community. They opened up their logistics center for the community. So these are the kinds of examples where those companies can not only advance their employees' well-being, of course, their shareholder value, which is generally what people think about when they talk about companies, but also be a vital part of the community. The challenge is connecting it.
Yeah, and I imagine it's sort of a no-brainer. It sounds obvious, but there are costs. It requires a different mindset. In the end, a company like yours, an insurance company, which insurers are going to play a really big role in the era we're entering, where climate is, it addresses and affects everybody all the time. In the end, you make more money, your clients make more money, but it does require a shift in thinking, in mindset. And that's a lot of what we want to discuss today in this session. Christoph Gorder, I want to just bring you into the conversation. You're at Airbnb. Everybody knows Airbnb. You're the executive director for Airbnb.org. And you guys have provided, in partnership with your hosts, I think 250,000 free homes to people who needed them during emergencies, including a lot here during the LA wildfires.
Yep.
How does that actually work? Can it scale? As we think about these kind of problems and what the unlikely solutions might be, not everybody might think of Airbnb, but you're in it. How are you in it? How does it work?
So it's a fascinating challenge. I spent 25 years working for nonprofits in disaster response, and it's my first experience working inside of a tech company at real scale. So there are 9 million properties around the world that we can flip a switch with the technology and open them up to anybody in need. And so that's the idea, is how do we actually do this? So the idea has been around for a long time, going back to Hurricane Sandy, when a host opened up their home for somebody in need. But really, we've taken a sort of a new look at it over the course of the last year to figure out how do we scale up. And Airbnb.org it's an independent nonprofit founded by Airbnb about 5 years ago, specifically with that mission, but with a really special relationship with Airbnb. So when the LA fires happened, we started monitoring them. They happened on January 7th. We started monitoring them about 11 a.m. By about 10 p.m. that night, we'd signed up our local partner. So we always work with a community-based organization. In this case, it was 211 LA, to do the intake. They know the community. They can do the eligibility screening. And by 8 a.m. the next morning, we'd issued out our first credits to the first evacuee. And over the course of the next 2 weeks, we housed 22,000 people for free here in LA by switching on the Airbnb network and making it available to anybody in need. And that's the power of scale, and just the really exciting thing about having a company of this scale be creative about how does it use its actual product and technology to help in this new world.
And what does it mean? I'm just curious, are there any Airbnb hosts in the room? Anybody here have an Airbnb? I'm an Airbnb host myself, so maybe it's just a question for me.
Right.
How does it work for the Airbnb hosts?
So we're a 501c3. We're raising money. Airbnb is our biggest donor, but we raise a lot of money. First of all, as a host, you can offer to donate a portion of your proceeds to Airbnb.org, which I would very much appreciate.
Will do. Consider it done.
Done, right? So we raise money, but then we're providing credits to the families in need. Then they can book whatever Airbnb they want. And at the time of booking, we'll ask the host for a discount. But really, I think, in an emergency, we need to give people the agency to make the booking that they need. We can't say, go fishing around for discounted inventory. Book the place that is near your job, wheelchair accessible, pet friendly, whatever it is your family needs. And that is the power of the scale. So hosts are participating. Airbnb waives all the fees, so the company makes no money. So that's probably 15% off the top. Generally, the hosts are giving some discount, and then we're paying for the rest.
It's a thread, and you know this from your career in the humanitarian space, that we moved from what Jose Andres was talking about, like dropping from the helicopter, the meals ready to eat, sort of predetermining what people want, to trying to give people more choice, right? And build systems that are more locally rooted and let people decide and vote with their feet. What do they want? What do they need?
We see the data clearly. The people who fled the Palisades fire stayed near the Palisades. People who fled the Eaton fire stayed near Altadena. And the funding that we're providing, the paying the hosts are in those communities.
Yeah.
So actually, that's the story that's not really told, because we focus on the guests that we're housing, but actually the money flow is going back directly into the grassroots community. For most of those people are Airbnb hosts to pay the mortgage.
Yeah. And staying local, being rooted locally is a key theme here. I think we'll pick up through the discussion. And in fact, Vanessa Kerry, maybe I can get you into the conversation. Vanessa, you wear many hats, but among them you built and lead Seed Global Health, which is really a beacon in the global health space. I mean, you've now trained, I think, 45,000 healthcare workers all over the world. You're obviously focused in a lot of the lowest resource settings where there's just insufficient numbers of healthcare workers, and you've really helped to strengthen those healthcare systems. You also are the special envoy for climate and health at the World Health Organization and a big advocate on the nexus between those issues. You know, I give my story about the Nigerian business leader. For all of us, if a disaster happens, you're only as good as the local healthcare system you have, right? That's what you're going to rely on. In many places in the world, it's not what you would need for an emergency. How do you see that when we think about the future of response and resilience? How should we think about healthcare?
Oh, thank you for the question. And you know, it's interesting because we are in LA, where there were the devastating fires here in January, and I'm also at the Harvard School of Public Health, and we did a webinar with the community here to talk about making folks aware of how the climate impact that was happening from the wildfires was really having an impact on their health. And that health may not be seen in the health sector here. You may not be going to the hospital, but you might have trouble breathing, or you may suffer a heart attack or a stroke, or you may have long-term effects from this, right? But the thing that was so striking to me, and I just want to flag this for a moment as we talk about disasters and we talk about the intersection of climate change and health, was that people on the phone on the webinar that we held wanted to know if it was safe for their kids to play soccer because of the ash on the turf. That's just the real reality of what we're facing, is that climate change is here. It is happening now. What we saw in LA, we're going to continue to see, unfortunately. And the reality is that there are health impacts, and that is the lived experience of climate change, and the human experience of climate change is going to be through health. And that also can be the entry point for action. And we're seeing this in sub-Saharan Africa as well, where Seed Global Health works. So we are seeing drought. We're seeing cholera outbreaks. We're seeing storms and cyclones that are the longest and most harsh that we've ever seen in history that are having implications across the entire sector. But we're also seeing that here. So this is a shared global experience that we're having. And it's true, as we see the health impacts coming from climate change, and we're seeing all the ways, and it impacts every aspect of health. Climate and health is not a concept in and of itself. Climate is an accelerant of existing health problems that we are going to feel and live even more. And so it's true, we need resilient healthcare systems, and we need a healthcare workforce to respond to those climate needs. But for this particular audience, a lot of whom is private sector, I want to point out that this is not just a feel-good moment. This is going to impact your bottom line. We already spend $800 billion in the United States from the impacts of climate and health in this country. Heat alone is going to reduce our productivity by $100 billion this year and by $500 billion in the coming 5 years. So 50 years, sorry, by 2050. So we're seeing really real implications for our bottom line too. 55% of the workforce in America had an issue with climate and health last year that reduced their productivity or their ability to go to work. So this is a here and now issue as well. But the solution is resilience. You mentioned the word resilience in the beginning. Our resilience is in investing in health. It's investing in prevention, and it's investing in our ability to care for people up front so they're not as at risk, but also being able to respond when these urgent moments happen. And I think we think of health as a other thing or a cost. It is a fundamental investment for our future, whether we're in Los Angeles or we're in sub-Saharan Africa. And you know, we're at a time where foreign aid is getting cut. That is very real. Not only are we going to see, you know, another probably 25 million people die just in the next few years from the foreign aid cuts, but actually, if we're going to do an America First approach, we're losing $23 billion in purchases from America that the funding was actually helping to support. 200,000 American jobs got cut again. So I'm only trying to flag that as we think of these as other issues, there are issues too.
You're right. And if we think of it from a resilience standpoint right now, due to those cuts, we actually have no visibility on where disease outbreaks might be happening around the world until they show up at LAX or in your hospital at Mass Gen.
50% chance of another COVID-like pandemic in the next 25 years. So I hope Airbnb.org is getting ready because it's coming.
Yeah. Hey, Don, I want to bring you into the discussion. Don Howard is the president and CEO of the James Irving Foundation. And Vanessa's talking about workforce, which is your bread and butter.
Yeah.
You think about the people who actually make it work every day, the essential workers, including healthcare workers. And oftentimes they might be the afterthought if we're focused on the infrastructure, right? So tell us, where does a focus on workforce fit in here? How did you think about this, deal with this during the LA wildfires? What are some of the lessons we can all take away?
Yeah, I'm happy to share. So it's the James Irvine Foundation, and we're California-focused, private philanthropy, no company, no family. For those who are in the know, that makes a big difference. And we do grant making this year of about $160 million. So our singular focus is on ensuring low-income workers have the power to advance economically. So we are all in on workers, and we hear cost estimates for how much damage there has been to buildings. We hear estimates for the health impacts that have occurred from a disaster. What people often don't think of are the employment implications. I won't quiz the audience, but just so you know, here in the LA wildfires, the estimate is that nearly $4 billion in lost wages occurred because of the fire. And that's about just a little less than 50,000 lost years of work, lost job years. And those are often happening to the least resourced people in our state. So if you think about the Palisades fires, I think we have a sense that Palisades was better off than the other communities that might have been affected. But if you look around that community, how many gardeners did you see? How many home care workers did you see? Who was taking care of the elders? Who was taking care of the kids? Who was doing your home repairs? These are largely day laborers or small business owners who, with one day notice, were put out of work, put out of business.
And many of these are undocumented workers,
they're
right?
many
They don't have a
undocumented,
safety net. of any
No
kind.
access to safety net services. And so coming back to jobs, there's a couple of categories of new jobs that come from climate change. Climate change in its own perverse way is a jobs opportunity. But the remediation jobs that came about, many of those same low-income workers were forced to do remediation jobs that were unhealthy and unsafe and didn't have the kind of training they needed in order to do them. So I think I want to make sure we don't miss, and this is really at the community level, which I know is part of the topic here, that the employment implications are huge. We can come back to that there are a lot of job opportunities that also come from climate. What we found was, for instance, I'll share grantees, a few here. If you want to know more, hit me up after the conference, after the session. There's one group called the National Day Labor Organizing Network that immediately went to work training undocumented workers on how to use PPE and how to take care of themselves in order to remediate the fires in Eden and the Palisades.
Yeah, I think there's a lesson in this for all of us, which is the way we define something, and that's sort of the storytelling we heard from Jen and from Chef Jose. The way we define it might define our response. And maybe, Michelle, on that point, bringing you into it, you lead CARE. Everybody knows CARE. You provide aid around the world to millions of people, hundreds of millions of people. And you've done something for many years now that is particularly relevant now, which is to no longer be thinking about, let's make a big decision and a design in a Washington, D.C. conference room, and then plan ahead what we're going to do for people overseas. Let's actually focus on what the community wants and be community-oriented and let the community be in the lead. That's not a new innovation, but it's particularly important now when funding is collapsing and we have to rethink and redesign this whole space. So how are you thinking about the international humanitarian architecture and response with far fewer resources today, if you count government money, but maybe more if you draw the circle bigger to include the likes of Airbnb or insurance companies? How are you thinking about where we go from here?
Yeah. Well, yeah, CARE is an organization that started, if anybody sent or received a CARE package, it actually started with us right after World War II, and it stood for Cooperative Assistance and Relief in Europe. And so we have 80 years of history of actually helping support, partner with, and build an ecosystem of response for humanitarian disaster and crisis. And I think it is important to step back, and Vanessa pointed this out, to take this moment in context, because in the last few months, we have seen what is in essence a 40% cut to the entire humanitarian system of the world.
Yep.
And so that is unprecedented over these last decades. It changes entirely an expectation of America's leadership in the world in terms of health infrastructure, in terms of global health security, in terms of how we respond to a disaster. I mean, just to give you a sense, when we had an earthquake in Syria and Turkey, the United States, within 24 hours, sent approximately 160 people, experts, 170,000 pounds of technical equipment. Just these last 6 weeks, we had an earthquake in Myanmar. We sent, I was estimated 3 people, and those people actually were fired during their deployment. And we put up initially $2 million and then an additional $9 million. That is night and day in terms of what the world has looked to from an American perspective. And so I think we do have to, one, actually lift up our voices in the spirit of this conversation to talk about the importance of building resilience. Because, for instance, the administration is talking about only supporting life-saving assistance. That means you're not building the support for families and communities to be resilient in the wake of disasters. So it's a much less cost-efficient way of approaching the work, in addition to costing many, many lives. So we have to lift up our voices. I think we also do have to reimagine the future. We're going to have to think about public-private partnerships in different ways. We're going to have to think about technology and new ways of operating. We're going to have to think about community-based resilience. We're going to have to broaden our understanding of what a disaster is. Still, the biggest disaster in the world is poverty, which kills more people than anything else combined. And so we have to, I think, reimagine and creatively think about collaboration and the ways in which we are going to move forward to be able to grapple with this. And we have to, I think, make sure that, for instance, those deaths that Vanessa referenced, an estimated 25 million that are projected in the next 15 years, but that's based upon the current realities. That does not have to be the future. And we have to lift up our voices, and we have to do something different. And I think we have to make sure that people who are dying now, so often that is the poor and the marginalized, are not invisible to the world's story.
That's right. I mean, if we could have Lou's center for the world, and imagine all of these risks and plan against them, you can solve this. I mean, you can invest against it. I know, Vanessa, you wanted to jump in quickly on this. I'll come back to you, Lou.
I do. I'm really appreciative of this idea of the kind of systems thinking. There is an opportunity here. This is not the way for us to revamp foreign aid. I think the sudden cutoff doesn't work. And I think we'd all admit the foreign aid system needed to be adjusted. But no one's going to disagree with that. The countries who are receiving this aid want agency. They want independence. They want to be financing domestically these issues. The problem is we also haven't structured it in a way that they're able to, and that's the possibility here, is to start to systems think here. We talked about resilience. If we invest in country-led plans where there's a whole of health system, if you will, resilience, and you incorporate clean energy, and you bring in nutrition, right? We heard in the session before about the need for nutrition. Nutrition is a lifetime payout. If a child isn't stunted, they are more likely to grow up and be socio and economically successful. If a mother doesn't die, her child is more likely to grow up and be socioeconomically successful. So we start to systems think about this as a moment. Country-led plans where they're triaging where people are dying the most, and we pool the funding that is limited, we can actually stretch it farther. There really is a possibility here, but we're going to have to be willing to think transformatively. We are going to have to be willing to step up, and we are going to need some upfront capital to make the initial investments and then build a pathway towards increasing that domestic financing, but resilience. Resilience for the world we see today, and resilience for the world that is only going to be coming.
This is the insurance business model, Lou, right?
Well, yeah, it could be. I think it truly could be. I mean, the typical insurance business model is figure out how bad the loss is and price enough to make money. And I think that, we think about how that served the world not particularly well. So, when you hear things like investment up front, public-private partnership, I think that's the model we need to move to. And I'll give you an example. We're a mutual company. We're basically custodians of our clients' money. In 3 years, we gave back $1 billion as a climate resilience credit to our clients. And because we visit all of their facilities every year, we could see how they use that money to improve their climate risk. And we were able to identify $30 billion of risk reduction that they were able to achieve with that $1 billion of their money that we returned back to them. So this is the kind of partnership that needs to happen. And I think when we think about community resilience, we need to now take those public entities that are working to achieve it, the private entities that are trying to make money and figure out cost-effective ways, and you know, our business model is to help them. All of our information, data sheets, are all public. You can find it on fm.com. But we need to make that connection. And that, in my mind, is what's not happening through public-private partnerships. The reality is, I think the problem's getting bad enough to where those entities are going to start sitting down together and thinking about what they can do about it. There's this old saying that you never want to exchange business cards after a catastrophe. Okay? So what you want to do is have that exchange of business cards now to see how you can take what you have and invest it to avoid the consequences of a catastrophe, or at least reduce them.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of what we're trying to do here. I am going to come to all of you in the audience for questions in just a minute, if you've got them. So start thinking of them. Christoph, let me just come to you on this. I saw at my hotel room window some Waymo cars here in LA, which is pretty cool, these self-driving cars. Here at this conference, we're hearing a lot about AI and new tech, and even the model you're discussing. It is a pretty advanced technology platform that's really only viable in the places where you operate. Mm-hmm. And so much of the world, the settings where Michelle and Vanessa and others work, are very low resource. How do we take some of the opportunities technology and business models like yours are providing and bring them to the places that are really low resource? I mean, you've worked in your career in a lot of these places, so you know it well. How do you square that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to think way out in the future. And so I think if we can perfect the model here, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we can be in some of the more lower income countries. And so, in the same way that I think, a lot of models get developed here and then get exported and across the world, I think my hope is when I think about Airbnb or other technologies like this, 5 years from now, it becomes pervasive around the world. So you think about smartphones, for example. You wouldn't see smartphones around the world for a long time, but then all of a sudden you did, right? And they become cheaper and more accessible. So, my hope is, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, there will be enough Airbnbs that we can help people all over the world. And I think there will be. And if not, the technology can still serve other needs and other platforms, right? So, for example, we can use the technology to have people sign up their homes, even though they're not part of the Airbnb commercial ecosystem. You could still have the technology for matching families to particular houses. You can have the profile of the house. You could have all of that, the back-end safety and identity verification systems. All of those exist and can be scaled out beyond the Airbnb as a commercial ecosystem, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and maybe even learning the model from Airbnb and picking it up and taking it to other countries that don't have the same ubiquity of Airbnb is a way you could scale too.
Yeah, I mean, the part that excited me about this was that it was not a commercial move at all. Like, this is not, the company is not thinking about this in terms of like how to acquire more hosts or guests. Like, there are commercial strategies that have nothing to do with Airbnb.org. And so this is really, I mean, what's exciting to me is it's really a pure play to say, how do you activate this enormous resource in a time of need and revolutionize? I think what resonates for me with with Chef Jose Andres is like, he's like, feeding people in catastrophes doesn't have to be like bad food, right? It can be great food, and that will give you more than nourishment. It'll give you a sense of community, and it'll put money into the economy. I think we're trying to take some of those same values and do that with housing.
Yeah. Don, maybe I can bring you into the discussion on this point, because dignity is a theme there with the great food, the great housing. This is a big challenge for the community you're serving.
Yeah, I think the international context, sort of bringing it down with Airbnb to sort of the local dynamic. If we look here in LA, because I know we're right sitting here in LA, and this is part of the theme of this session, it's estimated the recovery, the amount of rebuilding that needs to happen, will cover 420 football fields of area. This is an enormous building project that needs to go on. The estimated timeline is, and this has got to be an optimistic timeline, 4.5 years to get those areas rebuilt. So you add that all up, and there's some interesting studies that have done this. We need approximately 250,000 new construction workers to do the work to rebuild the Eden and Pacific Palisades areas. And you know what? We do not have 250,000 construction workers. In fact, as it stands, we're 25% short on construction workers. So you know what we've been doing, and it pains me. Our focus is California at the Irvine Foundation. We are flying construction workers in from Nevada and other states to do projects here because we are under-resourced. And if we start deporting folks, that makes the resource challenges even tighter. So what we think about a lot at Irvine, where our grantees do the work, we provide the resources, is to train, train, train. There's a jobs opportunity in here, and apprenticeships, as folks know, it's common in the skilled trades, but are now being seen as sort of the gold standard of employment development programs across industries. They require, and it's complicated, a partnership between community colleges, unions, and nonprofits that support apprentices to make it through the apprenticeship program.
But this does require planning, right? It's not just about the emergency
here's the
response.
problem. And yeah, if you're in California, and I hope the first partner doesn't take any offense at this, we do not have a labor market planning program. I have poked around, I have asked, I've talked to the Secretary of Labor. We don't know how many workers we need in which trade by which year. So that is block number one. That is the barrier number one. The other is standing up the pathway programs, which requires a lot of foresight. I talked to a union leader recently, very well respected, I respect her a ton, who said, well, I can't do an apprenticeship till I have a contract. Like, these are earn and learn, so I can't get folks to work. So there's kind of a catch-22. Until I have the project, I can't train the folk. And the job training programs themselves, we have a great, another grantee I'll mention called Winter, Women in Non-Traditional Employment Roles, here in LA, and they work with women coming out of the justice system. There's another one called the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. These are folks who've been failed time and time again, who through these nonprofits have pathways. They have partnerships with unions, LA Labor Fed, for instance, to get folks the kind of supports they need to move from being incarcerated into living wage jobs. If there is, I have twins who are 12, if they choose not to go to college, I will talk to them about being electricians. Yeah. If you want a profession that is a huge growth profession in our country and our state right now, we're moving everything to electric, and that's going to require a ton of electricians. Well-paid jobs, skilled trade, union jobs can earn up to $150,000 a year.
This is, Michelle, to your earlier point, like, it's a very artificial dividing line between a humanitarian response and long-term development. You know, you need to train the workers today so that you're ready 3 or 5 years from now to have the electricians to do the work that's needed. I know you wanted to jump in on the conversation.
Yeah, there are, and it's another category of organizations we support who are training resilience workers. Yeah. A group called Resilience Force. And their goal is to make sure folks are ready in advance to do the hardening, to do the kinds of changes to homes and businesses that make them withstand the kind of damages that we're talking about. So there are jobs in each of these categories: remediation, restoration, and hardening, and that really are going to be opportunities we need to take advantage of.
And in some ways, Michelle, it's an opportunity for economic growth, right? In other words, we can look at this as the glass half full. The world's full of crises. There are more climate-driven emergencies. But it's also an opportunity for countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa and elsewhere, with huge youth unemployed populations.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that we have learned over the last decades is that the nexus between long-term development and humanitarian response is really important. And our public policy, our investment structures have calculated towards that end. And I think we should make sure that we don't lose that essential insight. I think we also need to recognize that we need to be able to tap into the totality of human potential in order to be able to respond to the challenges that are around us. So as you were talking, I was thinking about, for instance, CARE spends a lot of our focus around women. And if you think about women in the humanitarian sector, they're often both those that are most impacted by disaster, conflict, gender-based violence, maternal health, a whole host of things. And they're also the ones that are absolutely at the center of response. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I have the head of of my humanitarian team says it's not the first responders, it's the women who are the first responders in their neighborhood, families, in their communities. And so I think we do have to make sure that the system is taking into account the totality of potential, investing locally, which is part of what we've all talked about here, which, as you said, does build resiliency in addition to being the most effective way of responding. I do, because we're covering the waterfront here, I do want to sort of just lift up that we do have to have a strategy for Afghanistan, Haiti, Gaza, Yemen, Myanmar. It is simply not okay to throw up our hands and say that this is not in our, for instance, short-term transactional diplomatic interests, so therefore we will abdicate all investment from a humanitarian perspective. That is literally untenable, both from a values perspective and also from the perspective of an interdependent world, from a health perspective and a national security perspective. And so right now we are in danger, I think, of making that fundamentally flawed decision to literally neglect those places that are the most humanitarian threshold crisis in the world.
And one of the ways the world's changed, we're talking about climate and other changes, is that increasingly poverty is concentrated in a small number of countries among the ones you just mentioned. Vanessa, you wanted to jump in on
Yeah,
this.
so if you...
I think, sorry, Vanessa, I think wanted to jump in.
Oh, sorry, Dick, Jeff. So if you think about who gets to decide how to rebuild a community, we can, from our perches as folks who are in elite positions, have ideas for how a community should be rebuilt, whatever the urban planners say. We believe in California, their communities should decide their own fates. And there are new economic directions. The way a community was isn't necessarily the way the community needs to be in terms of projecting out jobs that can create living wages, that can adapt. There's 500,000 acres of the Central Valley that will be fallowed because of water and climate change. Ag workers need new jobs. Having the community come together and say, we want ag tech jobs to be part of this future economy gives them the agency and the dignity to be able to describe the economies they want to see rebuilt.
I mean, I was just going to add to Michelle's point that, I think first, if we're going to be in the vested self-interest, if we are not engaging in these humanitarian efforts or building resilience or the foreign aid, it is a total loss of soft power. We are, fully ceding this to other powers, especially to China, which is a very aggressive Belt and Road effort that is getting, it's a financial gain for them for extraction and minerals, but it does really change our power structure. Just the way if we walk away from science and our investment in science, we're going to lose American competitiveness as well as all the health benefits that come from that. But I just, for a moment, want us to just think about our humanity. The human experience matters. Everything we do is supposed to be about improving our human experience, whether it is getting money or whether it is taking care of our children or whether it is being here and learning. We cannot walk away from our humanity. And we cannot walk away from what it means to be connected on an earth that is very globalized and what it means to care for other people. Otherwise, we literally do not have a reason to be here. And I think that is really important to think about the fact that these investments we're all talking about, whether it's rebuilding communities or creating, insurance schemes or care or being able to provide housing for someone, all of these things are fundamentally the right thing to do, but they also do help us do well. It is possible to do both if we are creative, we invest in smart partnerships, and we do not walk away from the responsibility of this moment. But this is fundamentally about our humanity, and I think we forget that far too easily.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Please applaud. I agree. I just want to. I want to add, as we wrap up here and we go to the panel, we've had a number of interesting questions, but the general theme among them is sort of, what do I do? What should my business do? I think, as I said in the beginning, many of us have thought about our own personal disaster preparedness plan. We may practice resilience in our own lives without realizing that's what it is, or sending our kids to school or what have you, like all these things that are just part of day-to-day life, but in the end, you could count as resilience. What should people in this audience take away differently? Now that we know what's possible, both how bad things can get, look at the LA wildfires, but how good they can be too, how people can respond. What should people do in their own lives, in their own organizations, at this nexus among the many different diverse organizations represented on this stage? Can I start with you, Christoph?
excuse me, I was reflecting on this too, just the diversity of ideas that you find represented here, from an organization that's been around for 80 years, helping the most needy in the world, to a tech company that was founded, 15 years ago, and using its creative resources to this. So I think, excuse me, the most important thing is all of us can make a difference, and looking creatively within our talents and our companies and our communities, there are ways that we can take the assets around us and think about how are those going to help make the world a better place. And so, Airbnb didn't have to create Airbnb.org and seed it and send it on its way, but they did. The founders and the leadership took a step back and thought, how can we give back to the community in a way that isn't, it didn't come from a self-serving point of view. It really is like, how do we use our best asset to help in this moment of need? And I think you see that with the insurance company, or like there's so many different ways. So I think all of you guys could do that, and if you want to brainstorm, call me up afterwards, and I'll be happy to whiteboard with you.
Nice. Lou, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so we're all members of our own community. Most of this audience has jobs, a lot of them high-level jobs. One of the things that we've seen in companies that succeed, both for their bottom line and for their resilience and for the public well-being of their communities, for their employees, is when the employees start asking the tough questions. Is my company in a position to be resilient? Are my locations where my people are working, are they going to be resilient to the hazards we're facing? Do we even know what those hazards are? Will those people have jobs the next day? Will those communities be healthy the next days? So bring those up. Raise your voices. The companies that we see do best are the ones where the people are asking those questions. The people start, then the board starts asking the questions, or the private owners start asking questions. So my message to this audience is, you can do it. I know it takes time, we're all busy, but you can do it in your workplaces, you can do it in your communities, you can do it with those you influence, you can do it in your volunteer activities, and the time is now.
Don?
So I'd say, particularly this audience, it may be hard to be out there helping to clean up a mess in the Eden Fire, but there are wonderful, committed, dedicated nonprofit leaders who are doing that work along with their communities, organizing their churches, organizing their communities, and helping folks get that done. So support those organizations that are doing that work. Spend your time trying to identify them. I've got a few names if you need them. There's plenty of information online. But get resources to folks, not just who are doing cleanup, which is super important, but who are thinking ahead so that we have the kind of hardening and we have the kind of workforce that's going to be required for what's coming. I think the idea that we are going to forestall climate change is gone. We need to be adapting at this point. Last thing I'll say, at the risk of maybe getting political, I'll try to keep it apolitical, is make sure you have leaders in your community and in your country who get this, who are eager to see the country succeed, acknowledge that there are dangers coming, and that we need to prepare for them.
Vanessa?
I would say be curious, because within the realm of your business or your world or organization, there is some capacity by which you can participate in fixing the community around you. If you'll, at Harvard, we're about to start a course actually that is going to guide businesses on how to actually look at with the ways that investing in health and well-being can actually increase your bottom line, and to make that connection for folks. But be curious to learn what that looks like, because I promise you it is out there. And then would just add that fundamentally, if you need the easiest thing, take care of your workforce. Invest in the health well-being of your workforce. You will see greater productivity. You will see a better community around you, and you'll be investing in the people of this world.
Michelle, final thought to you.
Lift up your voice, lift up your philanthropy, lift up your business expertise, because we need more business investment in this work. And Dorothy Day said that she spent her entire life looking for the feeling that she had after the San Francisco earthquake when she was a child. And she said it was the joy of doing good and sharing what we have. And that's what we discover after a disaster. That's what communities experience. And we are facing enormous challenges at the global level. We need to tap into that spirit now, all of us, in a galvanizing moment of civic renaissance and global citizenship.
Yeah, I love that. Let me just say, as a journalist, one of the kind of occupational hazards we have is to focus on the crisis in front of you, right? And these days, there's more than enough for us to write about on those topics. But the truth is, there's just as many stories of inspiration, of things that are working, of solutions, and a lot of it is at this nexus among the many kinds of organizations you see on this stage. So it's been inspirational for me. Thank you very much for being a part of this, and thanks to our audience.
Thank you.